Oh, nice, they have a dark mode. Cool. Oh, hello class. So apparently Redux got much easier nowadays with this new tool. Well, it's new to me. I'm pretty late to this actually. So someone recommended this actually from you guys last time to me, so thanks for that. And I've been playing with it and I really actually like it. So I should have said this already. This is Redux-toolkit. And this is a library that allows us to implement Redux in a much easier and concise way than it used to be. Now, let me explain Redux to those of you who don't know what it is. So Redux is a state management library that you use in your React application to, well, you can use it in any front-end application, not just React, but it's very popular with React. So what it does basically is when you have an app and you have a lot of data in there and you have so many different components, you use Redux to avoid doing something called prop drilling. And what that is let's say you have a top level component. Actually, I looked up already an image that demonstrates this. So this is an example. So this is a component tree of an app that does to-do lists. And here this top level, well, this second top level component to-dos has the state, meaning it has the data of the app, but it has to pass it down to-do list, which is okay. But then it has to pass down this toggle function down to this to-do item component and down to this toggle to-do component that does that. And once that toggle event happens or function, it uses this function and then this function calls something to update the state here. The problem with this is that you have to pass this function here and then here and then here, and maybe you have to pass some other stuff as well. So your code becomes really messy and unnecessarily cluttered. So I actually prepared an example to use for this video. So I created this app. It's just a simple app where you have like a contact list and you can add a name here. So I'll add myself, and then you can add a phone number. I'll just put a random number and hit enter. And it's gonna add me to the list. And by the way, you can get this app from this Git repo, which you'll find in the video description. And you just basically pull the code and then npm install and then run npm run server, because it's running this, it's using this library called JSON server. Actually, where is it? It's here. Yeah, it's using JSON server. And what this does basically just mocks up quickly a fake server with fake data, which is here in this db.json. As you can see, it just added me to this list. And then we can use it as like a pretend API. And then it's got also this React app, which you will run with npm start. And this has the app.js, which is the top level component. And as you can see here, we have a very similar scenario in which we have our contacts here. We're pulling them with this fetch contacts function in the app.js. And then we have these two components, contact list and contact input, which are the input and the list. And then we have to pass the contacts and the set context function from here to the contact input and also the contact list, because of course inside of the contact list, which is inside of component, we need to loop through them and show these cards. And also in the contact input, we need to have access to that function, the set contacts, so that once we added one, we send this request, we need to execute that set contacts and then add that new contact to the list so that it can be rendered in the contact lists component. So this is prop drilling in this case, is us having to pass this set contacts and contacts down to this contact input and list components. Now, this is not a very deep tree. I mean, we could have had more components inside of here and then had like a very deep prop drill. But of course, this app doesn't require it. But as you can see, when this particular app grows, this problem will become more prominent. And Redux solves this by having a central store. So I pulled up this article and I'll put a link to this in the description if you want to read more about Redux. So what Redux does basically, it has this store which all of the data, well, not all, as much as you want to be stored in this store. And then once your view, which is your app, or once the user that is browsing your view executes certain actions, which in this case is adding a user, for example, in this form, or deleting a user, that action or that UI element triggers an action, and then that action calls something called a reducer, which based on the type of action, it will do something, and then that something will modify the store. For example, we can send an action says add contact, and then it will have a payload, which is the data of that new contact, and then the reducer will understand that that add contact means let's add this to the list, and then updates the store. Now, what's cool about redux-toolkit is that it eliminated the reducer part. I mean, it doesn't actually eliminate it, but it eliminates the need for us to write it. It actually automatically generates it. It's still there in the background, but we don't have to worry about writing the boilerplate ourselves, as it does it for us. And a couple of other things that you will see that are really cool. So if we go to redux-toolkit.js.org, we can actually go to getting started. And here they have actually a cool example. You can actually run this command and then run it, and you will have everything configured, including like a basic store with like a counter state slice. But based on my experience, it's almost never the case that you start an app from scratch with Redux implemented. It's always that you have an app and then it's implemented one way and now you have to introduce Redux. So I think it's a better practice to do what I am intending to do here, which is have an app that's already made with a proper use case scenario and then introduce Redux onto it. And also I think it's better for you to write it yourself. It kind of cements the info in your head. All right, so we'll ignore these using these two commands, which already use this template, and we'll go with this approach. So let's actually copy this npm install command, or copy the yarn one if you're using yarn, and let's head back to VS Code. Of course, like I said, make sure to pull this repo and run npm install, and then let's go to the terminal and run this command to uninstall this redux.js toolkit, which installs everything that Redux needs. And now let's go back to the docs and let's scroll down. So here it tells us what's included, that's fine. And I think we go tutorial. Okay, so there's here a tutorial that shows you how to set up that code that you can get with the template they showed you at the start. So let's follow this. So let's go next. Okay, actually we needed to install React Redux as well. So let's go back to the terminal again and say npm install and install React Redux. And here it shows us that we can use this to configure our basic store. So let's actually copy this, and I'm actually going to put it in the root. So in the source directory, let's create a new file and call it store.js and paste that in. So this imports this configure store from redux.js toolkit, and it just calls it basically. And basically this call returns us the store. So the store is already set up. And of course we have to wrap our app with the store provider. So we need to do this step here. So let's go back to our index.js, and here let's import provider from React Redux. Actually, this needs to be here, and also import our store that we just created. So let's import store actually from the same directory /store, and we just call it store. And here we wrap our app with it. So here we use provider, and then we give it store equals store, and open that, and then wrap the app itself in the provider. And now every component that's beneath this app will have access to the store, and then these components can interact directly with the store. So let's see what else that we need to do here. So, okay, so here there's this example of this counter slice. And what a slice is basically is kind of a section in the state. Think of the state as a JavaScript object, because actually that's what it is. And then let's say you have to manage multiple things. In this case, for our app, we have to manage contacts. So we create a contact slice. And let's say you had some other data like user settings or authentication data, you create a slice for that as well. That way you separate them. And let's say if you had a component that needs the auth slice, it just pulls that slice, or actually pulls like something that's a child of that slice. And then when that thing that it pulls changes, it re-renders. So you don't have to pull the whole state in your components, because that way it's not optimized, and every time anything changes in the state, those components will re-render, which is not cool. So let's actually just copy this. Actually, there's a copy button here, so just click that. And here they put it in this features counter slice. I don't understand why it's in features. I'm actually just going to create a folder here, call it store. Actually, maybe the store should be inside of here. So let's actually drag the store inside of the store folder, and just call this index. And here in the store, let's create contacts or contact slice.js and paste that code here. So here we have this create slice, and let's rename this to contact slice. And the name will be the name of the key inside of the state. So here let's call this contacts. And we have an initial state. So in this case, we have this value. I don't want the value. Let's have, actually the thing here, if we do contacts, that means we'll have I'll put a comment here. We'll have the state for now. We'll have a contacts key, which is this slice itself. And then inside of it, it will have an object. And then this object will have a contacts key as well. And then we'll have our data here, which is pretty interesting. So this app itself is pretty simple. So I'm going to have the state itself to be the contacts array. So I'm going to say, actually, I've never tried that. So I'm going to try that as I go. So here, initial state, we're just going to say null. So in this case, our state will be this, like this. So here we have reducers. I don't know why they're called reducers here, because this whole thing is kind of like a reducer in of itself, but okay. Now we have some interesting comments here. To those of you who have used Redux before, I'm sure you've experienced the pain of being careful not to mutate the state, which means being careful not to edit it directly because it might not even update, and in some cases it might update but not re-render the components. But here, so before you used to do something like this, so we had, in this case, we had this value inside the state. Before you, to update value, you had to do state equals, and then you'll have an object, and then you'll spread the existing state, and then you'll give the new value to this value. And now, what's cool is that redux-toolkit uses in the background a library called immer, which takes care of this. We directly mutate the state, and then in the background, immer actually updates our state without mutating it. So it takes care of that for us. We just like do the code directly, or like write it in the most concise way, and then it takes care of like that for us in the background, which is pretty cool. So here, as you can see, we directly increment this value, which is nice. And by the way, you see how lean this setup is, right? It's just like 3 lines of code to set up the store. And this already comes set up with Redux DevTools, and it comes set up with redux-thunk, which, if you don't know what that is a library that allows us to perform asynchronous actions and update our state asynchronously. And this simple configure store configures all of that for us. And actually, if you head back to the docs and you create or click on usage guide here, you can see that this manual store setup, this is what we used to have to do before with Redux to set up a basic store. And it was like so much boilerplate that a lot of people prefer to just use context in so many apps just to avoid this pain. But now it's actually so easy to do. So let's actually start to convert the functionality of our app into Redux. So let's start in app.js. So here in app.js, we have this fetch contacts function, which does that. And now it sets this data to the local state variable, and then it passes it down. So what we want to change here, we want to have this fetch contacts inside the state, and also these variables inside the state, and then access them from within the components where we need them. So first thing, inside of our store, actually inside the contact slice, let's create one reducer function that sets the contacts. Now there are multiple ways of doing this. Some people have the function within the with the API call inside of the slice itself, inside of this file, or some people, they have that call inside of the component and then call an action that updates the state from there. I prefer the second approach, and I'll explain later why I prefer this approach. So here in the contact slice, we can change this increment and call it set contacts, and we can remove these comments, and this takes the state, and then what it does, actually will also take a second parameter, and that will be the action itself. And then, so we'll say action, and this action will have a type and a payload, but we don't care about the type right now. We just care about the payload, which is the data that is passed with this function. So here we simply want to say state equals this action dot payload, and then we don't need this decrement, and we'll have another one for deleting. So here let's say delete or delete contact, and then this payload, actually we can destructure it here, so we can say payload like this, and just remove the action dot for cleaner syntax, and then we can do the same here. So destructure payload. And here we want to remove a contact, and the payload here will be the ID. So if you see the data, if you look at the data, you'll see that every contact has an ID, which is a number. So you can send an ID and then tell the store to remove this from the list. Of course, we'll also send the API request to our fake server to remove this from the fake database as well, just like we would in a real app. So let's go back to our slice. So here we know that our contacts is an array. And if we could trigger this, that means we have an array and we have values in it. So we'll say state, which is our contacts list, equals state.filter c, where c.id does not equal payload. So we remove this one contact with that ID. And now we can say, so there's this call here, which extracts these action creators from the counter slice. Well, it's counter slice here, but it's actually contact slice. So let's rename both of these to contact slice. So we have this actions key, which gives us access to these action creators. So here we have the set contacts and we have the delete contact. Let's delete this. And we have these this auto-generated reducer. So now let's save, and also save our index.js and also our index.js, which is the store. Make sure that your import Actually, that import doesn't change, it's still the same because it's index.js. And now if we go back, by the way, make sure that you have Redux DevTools installed in Chrome as an extension or in your browser. I'm sure it's available in all browsers. So now if we go back to our app, okay, so we get an error here, no such file or directory, store.js. Okay, so I just had to restart it. All right, so now if we actually open the DevTools and we go to Redux, actually, I'm going to set that to contacts key inside the slice so it's less confusing. So here the initial state will actually be an object with a key called contacts, and that key will be null. And then here we'll say state.contacts equals payload, and then here we'll say state.contacts.filter. Okay, so let's save. Let's go back, refresh, and that. Okay, I think it's empty because we haven't called any action, so it hasn't fetched it. So let's just do that actually. As you might have already tested, this app already does actually work. So if you delete myself from here, it's actually deleted. And if you go back to the db.json, it's updating, which is pretty cool. And right now, of course, if we add, I'm just going to put some gibberish. It's actually going to send a request. If you check the network tab, you'll see that there is a... Okay, I didn't open it beforehand, but it actually does. So you have to trust me on that. And now let's change it to use Redux. So if we go to the app.js, actually we need to change the fetching first. So the fetching actually can happen from within the contact list. It doesn't need to be on the top element. Just this component that has this list can call the fetch contacts and get them and show them. So the only reason that it had to be here because we wanted to have this local state variable and pass it down, but now we don't. So let's grab this fetch contacts and also actually this use effect hook call. So cut both of them and go inside of contact lists and here paste both. Now let's see. So what we have to do is we have to call the fetch contacts, and then once we have that data, we need to use the set contacts from inside of the store and not this local variable that we have in app.js, which actually we could remove from here. So we can import that. Let's go here at the top of contact list and let's say import from back one level store / contact slice. And let's import the set contacts action creator. And to be able to use this, we need to also import from React Redux. Actually, Redux. We need to import use dispatch. And here at the top of the component, we can say const dispatch equals use dispatch. And we need to use this dispatch function to dispatch this action and pass it that data so that it actually takes effect. So here we have the fetch contacts function. The only difference here we have the set contacts and this is from the store. So now we need to wrap this in dispatch, and now let's wrap this as well. And we can't just save and test this because there's going to be some errors because now contact input doesn't know what contacts are because that doesn't exist anymore. So let's make sure that contact input also obtains the contacts directly from the store. So here we can import from back one level store / contact slice. Actually, sorry, we don't need anything right now from the contact slice. We need to import from React Redux, and we need to import use selector, which is a function that allows us to select a piece of the state and then use that inside of this component. So we need to get the contacts. So here inside the component, we'll say const contacts equal use selector. And here this takes the state, so it has a callback that takes the state, and then here we need to take the exact piece of data that we need. So we'll say take the state and return state.contacts.contacts because we have that object inside of the contacts slice. And now that I do this, I realize that I forgot a step actually. So if we go to not this index, actually this index, let's close this. So go to store / index.js. I forgot that we need to put the contact slice inside of this reducer, inside of the configure store call, so that it combines them together, these slices, to make up the whole state. So here in the index.js, import that slice. So import contact slice from same directory / contact slice. And here we'll call this contacts and just pass the contact slice. Or actually, you can import this as contacts reducer because these are reducers. Because if you look at the contact slice, the default export is actually the reducer. So this is following the same convention as they do. Doesn't really matter, but it's kind of semantically sensible. So let's save this and let's go back to our contact input. So here now we're getting the contacts from the contact slice. Now we can use that contacts inside of here to, actually, where do we need it? Actually, yeah, we just need it here to use the set contacts, which, by the way, we need to get from the store as well. So we've already done this, so we can go back to contact list and get these two imports and paste them here. And this use dispatch can be inside of here because they're from the same library. So remove that, and now we need to call this set contacts inside of this function, which adds the new contact. So here, where we have this set contacts call, now we need dispatch. So here inside of the component, here we'll say const dispatch equals use dispatch. And now we can dispatch the action, and here where we have the set contacts, we can say dispatch and then just wrap this and remove this destructuring of props because we're not using these anymore. And go back, actually remove that and go back to app.js, make sure that this contact input is not receiving these two props. And this loading, we can remove this as well because we can manage that from inside the contact list component itself. So actually remove all these props from here. And as you can see, our code is already much cleaner. Actually, I don't know what this comment is doing here. Okay, remove that. Also remove these imports, save, and let's check what our code is doing again. So we have this input, and then we got use dispatch and use selector, and then here we just create dispatch, that's fine. And then this, when we submit our form, we just get the values, do some validation, set is loading inside of here. We send an API request, and then we dispatch set contacts, and then we spread the existing contacts and just add this new one. And now as I read this code, I realize there is a slight mistake here. It's not actually a mistake, but it's an inaccuracy. We're pulling contacts from the state, which means every time contacts changes, this whole component re-renders. Now, this component is actually just this input. It doesn't need to re-render every time the contacts changes because it doesn't need that data itself. So what would be more efficient is that we can create a function inside of our store that just takes care of this process of adding a new contact without us having to do it from inside of this component, so we don't rely on this slice of data. So we can easily just create here. I should just copy this and paste, and let's call this add contact, and this takes a state and a payload, that's fine. And now it simply says state.contacts equals, and I think we can use push. I'm not sure actually. Let's just use that and see what happens. So we'll say state.contacts.push. I'm not sure if this is reactive. Maybe it is. It should be because of imma. So now this will be generated by this contact slice actions, so we can export it. So add it to that list. Now if we go back to contact input, we no longer need this set contacts. We actually need the add contact. And actually we don't need this contacts from the state. So remove this use selector call and also remove the import. And let's go down here where we successfully create this contact. We can simply dispatch add contact and then just pass this data as the payload. Okay, save this and let's look at the contact list. So the contact list needs to use the delete contacts. So let's import that as well. So delete contact, and actually let's implement set contacts here as well. So we fetch the data, we set contacts. Oh, okay, so this is kind of darker. It's not being used because it's using this from the state. So remove these destructuring because we no longer have any props anyway. So let's check that everything is fine. So here we fetch, we dispatch set contacts, and we set the contacts. Okay, everything here should be exactly the same. And here when we delete, we call this delete contact, which is this function. There may be some confusion, so I'm gonna just rename this to remove contact. And this will actually trigger the delete contact from inside the contact slice. So here we'll wrap this in a set or in a dispatch. So we dispatch, and we actually don't do this logic anymore because this is being done inside the store. So let's remove this and dispatch delete contact and simply just pass this ID because we already made an API request to delete this ID, and then the fact that we got here, that means that was successful. So now we just need to remove it from our local state, or actually our client state. It's not local to this component. So let's save all files and see if we get any errors, and of course we do. So here we get set loading is not defined. Okay, because we were getting it from outside, so we need to manage that loading here. Now some people put loading variables inside of the state, And I don't like this approach because usually loading variables are only used within that same component, so I like to manage the loading and the UI states of every component within that component itself. Once I actually need that variable in very nested or deeply nested children of that component, then I can actually outsource that to the store. So I take the approach of use as much as you need. So here let's actually add that. So we'll say call the use state snippet and call this loading, and of course initially it will be false. Let's import use state from React, so React use state, and actually we need use effect here as well, so use effect. Let's save and check now. Okay, contacts is not defined inside of contact list. Okay, and that's because we're not actually getting it. So from React Redux, let's import use selector, and here let's say const contacts equals use selector, and this will take the state and then return state dot contacts. Save, and let's check it out. Fresh. Cool. So let's check out our state Redux. There we go. So at the beginning we initialize the store, and then it called this contact slash set contacts because that's what's happening inside the contact list after calling the API, and it added the contacts. So as you can see, we have, let's check out the raw. This is our state, this is our contact slice, and inside the contacts we have the contacts array. And now if we type a name here, so I'll add myself, Ahmed, and number, some gibberish, and click add. There we go, it actually triggers this contacts add contact action, and if you check out this action and check out the diff, you see it added myself to the list, which is pretty cool. And also of course it's being added to the fake database, as you can see here in the db.json. And if we test out the delete, so if I delete this gibberish one, so click and we confirm, there we go. So now this delete contact was called and it deleted this gibberish contact. And of course, if we add more just to have fun with it, you see it just adds more without any problem. And that loading is handled inside of that component as I think it should. And that's it. That's how easy it is to implement Redux nowadays. I really like redux-toolkit. I'm going to be using it anytime I'm going to use Redux in an app. No doubt about that. Alright, that's it for this one. Thanks again for watching. Please do like this video and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. And let me know in the comments if you're actually going to be using Redux. And to whoever recommended that to me, again, thank you. And the full code to this will be available in a Git repo in the description of the video. And yeah, thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.